I am David Sloan Wilson, president of the Evolution Institute, and delighted to introduce you to ProSocial, a practical method for accomplishing positive change at all scales, from individuals to the planet. Positive change efforts are not new. All of us seek positive change in our own ways, and many methods have been developed, including therapeutic and training methods for individuals, change methods in businesses and other organizations, and change methods used by social activists, such as Mahatma Gandhi and Martin Luther King. Politics is a change method that sometimes works well, even though it often breaks down. All of these change methods use words such as evolve and adapt in the vernacular as part of the vocabulary of positive change. But what they don't do, and could not do until recently, is consult the actual science of change, namely evolutionary science. ProSocial is the first practical change method based explicitly on evolutionary science, along with complex system science. These are the two most basic theoretical foundations for the study of any topic, including the topic of positive change. There is a reason why a practical change method based on a combination of evolutionary and complex system science could not have existed until recently. Darwin's vision of evolution included all aspects of humanity in addition to the rest of life. With the advent of genetics in the early 20th century, however, the study of evolution became largely constricted to genetic evolution. Other forms of change, such as cultural change and personal change, were ceded to other academic disciplines such as psychology, anthropology, sociology, political science, economics, and history. Each of these disciplines and the many schools of thought within them developed into sophisticated bodies of knowledge, but largely without reference to each other or with evolutionary science. This has resulted in a knowledge archipelago, many islands of thought with little communication among islands, which is a major limiting factor in accomplishing positive change. Only during the closing decades of the 20th century did this trend start to reverse. Evolutionary scientists went back to basics by defining evolution as any process that includes the three basic ingredients of variation, selection, and replication. Variation means that entities vary in their properties. Selection means that their differences make a difference in terms of survival and reproduction. Replication means that when entities give rise to other entities, their properties are transmitted, at least to a degree. This back-to-basics approach to evolution includes genetic evolution plus more. Other evolutionary processes include epigenetics, changes in gene expression rather than gene frequency, and forms of social learning found in many species. The capacity for symbolic thought, which is distinctively and perhaps even uniquely human, enabled an even more powerful form of cultural evolution, as flexible and much, much faster than genetic evolution. While evolution is typically envisioned as a process that takes place across generations, it can also take place within a single organism during its lifetime. The best-known example is the immune system, which is said to include both an innate and an adaptive component. The innate component is a sophisticated set of mechanisms for fighting pathogens that evolved by genetic evolution and does not change during our lifetimes. The adaptive component does change during our lifetime through the production of millions of antibodies and the selection of those that successfully bind to antigens. It is a fast-paced process of evolution taking place within us, built by the slower process of genetic evolution. The concept of one evolutionary process giving rise to another evolutionary process is an important part of new evolutionary thinking that has been incorporated into ProSocial as a practical change method. Are there other examples of evolutionary processes taking place within us during the course of our lifetimes? Yes. Our behavioral flexibility includes innate and adaptive components, much like our immune system. We are not born as blank slates. Rather, we are born with an arsenal of sophisticated psychological mechanisms that evolve by genetic evolution and are triggered by environmental stimuli, just like the innate component of the immune system. But we are also born with the ability to vary our behavior more or less at random, to ramp up the behaviors that are rewarding, and tamp down the behaviors that are punishing, much like the selection of antibodies. And our capacity to invent, select, and replicate symbolic meaning systems is even greater. The more we understand learning, symbolic thought, and other forms of individual flexibility at the mechanistic level, the more we see evolutionary processes, which are given labels such as neural Darwinism and evolutionary development. Between the evolution that takes place within organisms and the evolution that takes place across generations, nearly all of the fast-paced changes swirling around us and within us can be understood as evolutionary processes, capable of being studied with the same conceptual toolkit that has already been developed for the study of genetic evolution. All of this has been taking place mostly within the last few decades and is still in its formative stages. A similar story can be told for complex system science, although for a different set of reasons. Complexity is an undeniable fact of life, emphasized by nearly everyone who describes the natural world or the human condition in words. But what if we want to go beyond words to develop formal theories? Mathematics is a powerful tool that began to prove itself in the 17th century with figures such as Isaac Newton. Imagine how amazing it must have seemed to be able to predict the laws of motion, including the orbits of the planets, with such uncanny accuracy. Yet, the power of mathematical equations is actually very limited. This can be illustrated by what is called the three-body problem in physics. Newton's equation can easily predict the trajectories of two celestial bodies as they rotate around each other while moving through space. The trajectories of three bodies are far more complex, and even when they can be modeled mathematically, the slightest change in initial conditions radically alters the behavior of the whole system. Adding more bodies complicates matters still further, beyond the ability of a set of mathematical equations to predict. The same can be said for mathematical models of genetic evolution. Evolution at a single genetic locus is a matter of simple algebra. Evolution at two loci is more challenging. Evolution at three loci, with gene-gene and gene-environment interactions, quickly becomes impossible, not to speak of entire genomes. As for physics and genetics, so also for any other complex system, such as a biological ecosystem or a human social system. Formal mathematical models of such systems quickly hit a complexity wall, beyond which they cannot go. When formal mathematical models command authority, as they often do in fields such as economics, then this amounts to a denial of complexity, even though we know from common experience that complexity exists all around us. How can we comprehend complex systems in a way that goes beyond verbal descriptions and formal mathematical models? Only with the help of computers, with simulation techniques such as agent-based models. And widespread computing wasn't available until the closing decades of the 20th century. Hence, the study of complex systems in relation to human affairs is just as recent as the study of evolution in relation to human affairs. Complex system science is more general than evolutionary science because it includes both living and non-living systems. Evolutionary science covers only living systems, but this is such a special subset of all complex systems that it requires a theory of its own. In fact, when ideas from non-living complex systems are naively applied to living systems, this can create its own kind of confusion. The integration of complex system science and evolutionary science is still very much a work in progress. Historians will look back upon the 21st century as a period of synthesis for human-related knowledge, comparable to the synthesis of biological knowledge which took place during the 20th century, and of course continues. Much remains to be discovered, but enough progress has been made to provide a new foundation for practical change efforts in real-world settings. This is what distinguishes ProSocial from nearly all other practical change methods. ProSocial is the first practical change method solidly grounded in the best of our current knowledge about complex systems and evolution. ProSocial delivers a double benefit. First, it allows us to ponder the deepest philosophical questions that have ever been asked concerning the nature of life and what it means to be human. Second, it provides a toolkit for making life better in a practical sense. What could be a better combination than that? I love the toolkit metaphor because it is so mundane. A carpenter or plumber arrives at the site with his or her toolkit, sizes up the job, pulls out the appropriate tools, gets the job done, and moves on to the next job. Wouldn't it be great if we had a set of conceptual tools that could accomplish positive change job by job in the same way? That's what ProSocial strives to provide for any group, anywhere in the world, not only to improve its internal organization, but also to help accomplish positive change at larger scales, ultimately the scale of the entire Earth. Groups that implement ProSocial learn about the tools in Darwin's toolkit from trained facilitators. The learning process is fast and results in short-term benefits, but the goal is to establish a long-term relationship with each group. ProSocial regards each group as a cell in a multicellular society. A crucial insight of ProSocial is that the cell is not a single person, but a typically small group of people working together to accomplish meaningful goals. Just as our health requires our cells to be healthy and to coordinate their activities in the right way, the same is true for social cells, which must work well as units in their own right and interact the right way with other groups to become a body politic. For this to be accomplished, long-term associations must be maintained with each group. For the rest of this introduction, I will introduce you to some of the tools in Darwin's toolkit that are put to practical use in ProSocial. Let's begin with the three ingredients of all evolutionary processes: variation, selection, and replication. Almost everyone knows this much about evolution, but few appreciate the amazing insights that result when the three ingredients are put together. To see what I mean, look at this picture of a typical desert. Please guess the color of most of the species that live in this desert, such as insects, snails, reptiles, birds, and mammals. Now here is a picture of a desert where the sand is black. Such deserts are less common than brown deserts, but they exist. What is the color of most of the species that live in this desert? And here is a picture of a desert where the sand is white. How about the color of most of the species that live in this desert? These are not trick questions. If you answered brown, black, and white, then you were right. But what lay behind your thinking? Assuming that you're not a creationist, then you must have been assuming that desert-living species vary in their coloration, that individuals colored to match their background survive better and have similarly colored offspring. It is the three ingredients of an evolutionary process that enables you to make your predictions with such confidence. Here's another amazing fact. You could make your predictions without knowing anything about the physical makeup of desert-living species. Insects, snails, reptiles, birds, and mammals have different genes and physical exteriors. But as long as their physical makeup results in heritable variation, that is the extent to which it can be ignored, turning the organism into a kind of a malleable clay that is shaped by environmental forces of selection. In this way, evolutionary thinking provides a kind of instant expertise for predicting the properties of organisms in relation to their environments. Such predictions are not certain to be correct. They can fail for a number of reasons, but they're an excellent place to begin understanding any product of an evolutionary process. Evolutionary scientists call this adaptationist thinking, or natural selection thinking, and it is one of the most powerful tools in Darwin's toolkit. If evolution goes beyond genetic evolution, then adaptationist thinking goes with it, providing the same kind of instant expertise for the outcomes of cultural and personal evolution. One person who understood this was B.F. Skinner. Here is what he wrote in a 1981 article in Science magazine titled Selection by Consequences. Selection by consequences is a causal mode found only in living things or in machines made by living things. It was first recognized in natural selection, but it also accounts for the shaping and maintenance of the behavior of the individual and the evolution of cultures. In all three of these fields, it replaces explanations based on the causal modes of classical mechanics. The replacement is strongly resisted. Natural selection has now made its case, but similar delays in recognizing the role of selection in the other fields could deprive us of valuable help in solving the problems which confront us. If anything, Skinner placed too much emphasis on adaptationist thinking, or selection by consequences as he put it. But other tools in Darwin's toolkit provide a more fully rounded approach. This person is Nico Tinbergen, a pioneer in the study of animal behavior. During the first half of the 20th century, it wasn't obvious that a behavioral trait, such as aggression, could evolve in the same way as a physical trait, such as a deer's antlers. That is what Tinbergen helped to establish, earning him a Nobel Prize in 1973, along with two other pioneers, Konrad Lorenz and Carl von Frisch. Tinbergen is also famous among biologists for pointing out that 4 questions need to be addressed about all products of evolution, concerning their function, history, mechanism, and development. For example, the function of the human hand is to manipulate objects. Historically, it evolved in the vertebrate lineage and is the same anatomical structure as the fins of fish. Mechanistically, it is composed of bones, muscles, tendons, nerves, blood vessels, and skin, put together in just the right way to perform its function. Developmentally, it begins to appear during the 5th week of gestation. All 4 questions must be asked in conjunction with each other for complete understanding of the hand, and the questions do not substitute for each other. This means that when B.F. Skinner said that selection by consequences replaces explanations based on causal modes of classical mechanics, he was mistaken. A mechanistic explanation of selection by consequences is needed alongside a functional explanation. In any case, Tinbergen's 4 questions are needed to address all products of evolution, not just genetic evolution, adding to Darwin's toolkit. The next major tool is called multi-level selection, and the best way to introduce it is with the game of Monopoly, where the goal is to own all the real estate and drive the other players bankrupt. So imagine playing the game of Monopoly, you know how it goes, and now imagine playing in a Monopoly tournament where many games are in play, and the trophy goes to the team that collectively develops its properties the fastest. Isn't it interesting that nearly every decision you make as a team player in a Monopoly tournament will be different than when you were playing the single game of Monopoly? The difference is that in a single game, you are competing against other members of your group. In the tournament, you are cooperating with members of your group to compete against other groups. Evolution is just like this. It takes place at different scales or levels. The smallest scale, between individuals within a single social group, results in the evolution of disruptive, self-serving behaviors, like the most successful strategies in a single game of Monopoly. We need to go up a level to selection between groups within a multi-group population to find evolution favoring cooperative behaviors, like the most successful strategies in a Monopoly tournament. This means that cooperation and just about everything else that we associate with virtue can result from an evolutionary process, but only when special conditions are met. Otherwise, disruptive, self-serving behaviors and just about everything else that we associate with vice can result. And this logic, which I have described for 2 levels of selection, can be expanded to multiple levels of selection because life consists of groups within groups within groups. What's good for me can be bad for my family. What's good for my family can be bad for my clan. What's good for my clan can be bad for my nation. What's good for my nation can be bad for the planet. This is profoundly different than the concept of the invisible hand in economics, which pretends that the lower-level pursuit of self-interest, such as individuals maximizing their utilities or corporations maximizing their profits, robustly benefits the common good. Nothing could be further from the truth. Multi-level selection theory therefore has profound implications for economic policy, in addition to the social interactions that take place within small groups. It even explains the evolution of cancer, as natural selection taking place at the level of genes and cells within individual organisms. Cancer cells are playing the individual game of Monopoly within our bodies. Once we absorb the implications of multi-level selection, we can see that what counts as adaptive in the evolutionary sense of the word frequently departs from what counts as adaptive in the normative sense of the word. Normatively, we're seeking positive change that benefits everyone over the long term. Evolutionarily, we find adaptations that benefit lower-level units at the expense of the higher good. Self-preservation is a good thing until it becomes self-dealing. Helping kin is a good thing until it becomes nepotism. Helping friends is a good thing until it becomes cronyism. Growing our nation's economy is a good thing until it overheats the earth. Corporations maximizing their profits is a good thing until it results in obscene inequality and epidemics of gun violence, opioid use, and food-related illnesses. In short, evolutionary processes will take place whether we want them to or not. Unless we align evolutionary processes with our normative goals, they will result in problems rather than solutions. We must become smart enough about evolution to wisely manage evolutionary processes. In addition to products of evolution that are adaptive but misaligned with our normative goals, there are products of evolution that are maladaptive in every sense of the word. Here is a picture of a male beetle attempting to mate with a beer bottle. Note that the wing covers of the male have a dimpled appearance. This is characteristic of the species and the cue that the males evolved to use to search out females. Beer bottles with a dimpled appearance were not part of the beetle's environment until very recently. So the male beetle has been fooled into thinking that he has found the largest, most beautiful female beetle on Earth. This is called an evolutionary mismatch. Organisms can only be adapted to the selection pressures of the past. If the current environment becomes different than the past environment, then previous adaptations can easily become current maladaptations. Only subsequent evolution, or a human intervention, such as changing the appearance of beer bottles, can remedy the situation. When we think of how much our current environments differ from our ancestral environments, not only with respect to our genetic evolution, but also with respect to our cultural and personal evolution, then we are more like the male beetle than we might like to admit. And such is our global impact, that we're creating novel environments and therefore mismatches for all other species on Earth. Only a sophisticated knowledge of evolution can help us solve these problems that we have created for ourselves. Earlier I said that an evolutionary worldview enables us to ponder the deepest philosophical questions that have ever been asked concerning the nature of life and what it means to be human. Amazingly, a single concept called major evolutionary transitions, which follows directly from multi-level selection theory, provides a key to both. Most social species are a mosaic of traits that evolved by within and between group selection. This means that members of groups cooperate to a degree, but also inflict suffering on each other, like unhappy marriages. But the balance between levels of selection is not static and can itself evolve. Every once in a while, mechanisms evolve that suppress the potential for disruptive within-group selection so that between-group selection becomes the dominant evolutionary force. Then something magical happens. Social groups become so cooperative that they qualify as higher-level organisms in their own right. In fact, every entity that we currently call an organism or superorganism, such as a bacterial cell, a nucleated cell, a multicellular organism, and a social insect colony evolved in this way. Even life itself might have originated as groups of cooperative molecular interactions. When I said that Darwin's toolkit enabled us to ponder the very nature of life, I wasn't kidding. Even more amazing, the same concept can explain what it means to be human. The majority of primate societies, including our closest relatives, chimpanzees and bonobos, are very much like unhappy marriages. Yes, there is a degree of cooperation, but group members also inflict tremendous suffering on each other. Aggressive interactions are 100 to 1,000 times more frequent in a chimp community than a human community. In many primate species, the highest source of infant mortality is imposed by adults, killing the babies of others to have their own babies. These are horror societies in human terms, yet they are stable because disruptive within-group selection is a strong evolutionary force, like the single game of Monopoly. Why is our species so different? Because our species is genetic evolution's newest major transition. Our distant ancestors found ways to suppress disruptive self-serving behaviors within their groups, so that between-group selection became the dominant evolutionary force. Nearly everything distinctive about our species, compared to our closest primate relatives, can be seen as a form of cooperation within groups. This does not mean that our ancestors became nice in every way. Between-group selection does not eliminate competition, but rather elevates it to the level of between-group interactions, where it can take place with even more destructive force than before. And the suppression of disruptive competition within groups can acquire a compulsory form that isn't very nice either. Evolution doesn't make everything nice, but it does explain the morally complex nature of our species better than any other explanatory framework. Cooperation within groups includes forms of physical cooperation, such as hunting, gathering, childcare, modifying the environment, defense against predators, and defense and offense against other human groups. In addition, there are mental forms of cooperation. We cooperate to make decisions and to collectively store more learned information than any single person can remember on their own. Most of all, we cooperate to maintain an inventory of symbols, including but not restricted to language. How does symbolic thought differ from the kind of associative learning found in many species? If I give cheese to a rat while saying the word cheese, the rat will quickly form a mental association between the sound and the object. However, that association will just as quickly be broken if I continue to say the word without pairing it with the object. In other words, the rat's mental association is closely tied to the environmental association. In contrast, I could say the word cheese to you 1,000,000 times and you would still associate the word with the object. Your mental association has become detached from the immediate environmental association. In short, humans have a mental world that is detached from the real world far more than any other species to our knowledge. The main puzzle about this is not how such a mental capacity could evolve, but why it evolved. What good is it? How did it contribute to survival and reproduction? The answer is that, even though our mental world is detached from the real world, it still motivates behaviors that take place in the real world. This makes our symbols similar to our genes. We don't expect a direct correspondence between our genes and our environments. We expect our genes to result in our properties as organisms to enable us to survive and reproduce in our environments. Likewise, we needn't expect a direct correspondence between our symbols and features of our environments. It is only necessary that our symbols structure our lives so that we can survive and reproduce in our environments. Genes and symbols share something else in common: combinatorial diversity. If there are 2 alleles at each of 10 genetic loci, that results in over 1,000 genetic combinations or genotypes. The whole genome includes thousands of polymorphic loci, resulting in a nearly infinite number of genotypic combinations, each resulting in a suite of properties, the phenotype, for selection to operate upon. If the elements of a symbolic system vary, like polymorphic genes, then the number of combinations becomes nearly infinite in the same way. There is a symbotype-phenotype relationship similar to a genotype-phenotype relationship, and it is worth coining the new word to stress the comparison. It is the capacity for symbolic thought that makes human cultural evolution so much more powerful and adaptable than cultural evolution in other species. Equipped with an ability to rapidly adapt to our environments by cultural means, our ancestors spread over the entire planet, occupying every habitable climate and dozens of ecological niches. Then, with the advent of agriculture, the scale of human society increased from tribes of only a few thousand to the mega-societies of today. An evolutionary worldview truly enables us to ponder what it means to be human, in addition to the nature of life. Now let's bring these powerful ideas down to earth so that they can be used to accomplish positive change in real-world settings. ProSocial draws upon and generalizes 2 islands of the knowledge archipelago that are seldom related to each other. The first is the work of Elinor Ostrom, who received the Nobel Prize in Economics in 2009. Ostrom was a political scientist, not an economist, and was unknown to most economists when she won their most coveted honor. Even with the fame that came with the Nobel Prize, Ostrom and her work is still far less known than it needs to be. What did she do that was so important? She studied the tragedy of the commons, a phrase made famous by the ecologist Garrett Hardin in an article published in Science magazine in 1968. Hardin asked the reader to imagine a village with a common pasture that all the villagers could graze their cows upon. The pasture can support only so many cows, but each villager has a selfish interest in adding more of their cows, resulting in the tragedy of overexploitation. This became a parable for the overuse of common pool resources of all sorts, such as pastures, forests, fisheries, and groundwater. Conventional economic wisdom held that the only way to prevent the tragedy of overuse is to privatize the resource, if possible, or impose top-down regulation. Ostrom showed, in part by creating a database of common pool resource groups around the world, that some of them were able to manage their resources on their own, but only if they implemented 8 core design principles This was her main accomplishment that earned her the Nobel Prize. Without further ado, here are Ostrom's 8 core design principles. As I list them, ask yourself if they might be relevant to the groups in your life. First, groups that were able to self-manage had a strong sense of identity and purpose. They knew that they were a group, that the purpose of the group was important, who counted as a member of the group, and the boundaries of the resource that they could collectively call their own. Second, benefits and costs were fairly distributed. It was not the case that some members of the group did most of the work while others reaped most of the gain. What they got from the group was proportionate to what they gave. Third, decision-making was inclusive. It was not the case that some members called the shots without consulting the others. This means that decisions were equitable and made use of the knowledge of all members of the group. Fourth, agreed-upon behaviors were monitored. Otherwise, there is no way of knowing if members are doing what they should. Fifth, there were sanctions against misbehavior, but they didn't start out harsh. A friendly reminder is usually enough to keep members in solid citizen mode, but it must be possible to escalate if necessary, including the ultimate sanction of exclusion from the group. Sixth, there was fast and fair conflict resolution. Conflicts will occur, and they must be resolved quickly. Most parties in a dispute think that they have a point of view that must be respected. Seventh, group members must have sufficient authority to manage their own affairs. Otherwise, they can't self-govern. Eighth, there must be appropriate relations with other groups that represent the same design principles. This means that after a group gets its internal affairs in order, it already has the tools to begin getting its external affairs in order. Might these same design principles be important for the groups in your life? When we introduce groups to these principles as part of ProSocial, group members almost invariably conclude that they are easy to understand, important for their group, yet paradoxically are not always implemented very well. In other words, all groups appear to be like the particular type of group studied by Ostrom. They vary in how well they function, and the best owe their functionality to the same core design principles. Multi-level selection theory explains why the core design principles are so general. What all groups share in common is the need for coordination and cooperation among group members to achieve common goals. All of them are vulnerable to disruptive self-serving behaviors by group members, but the core design principles minimize this danger. Imagine someone trying to play the single game of Monopoly in a group that strongly implements the core design principles. It will not be easy to do. In contrast, a group that does not implement the core design principles will be easy pickings. Conversely, imagine that you're a genuinely pro-social person without a selfish bone in your body, in a group that strongly implements the core design principles. You can feel safe, freely giving to others, knowing that your efforts will not be exploited. You will not feel so safe in a group that does not implement the core design principles, causing you to withhold your efforts or exit the group. In evolutionary terms, implementing the core design principles in a group is like accomplishing a major evolutionary transition for that group, making it a much more cooperative unit than it would be otherwise. That is the generality that I established with Elinor Ostrom in a collaboration that began shortly before she won the Nobel Prize and lasted until her death in 2012. So part of ProSocial involves helping groups learn about and implement the core design principles, along with auxiliary principles that are needed by some groups but not others to achieve their particular goals. But this by itself is not enough. Adopting the core design principles require a group to change its practices. Changing in a positive direction like this can be difficult, even when everyone wants to do so. This is also true at a personal level. Every year we make our New Year's resolutions, and every year we typically fail to keep them. Fortunately, effective change methods have emerged from other islands of the knowledge archipelago, which make great sense from an evolutionary perspective. ProSocial has uniquely integrated these methods with Ostrom's design principles approach. What are the islands of the knowledge archipelago where these effective change methods can be found? Collectively, they're called contextual behavioral science, which means the study of human behavior in the context of everyday life with the goal of prediction and influence in addition to basic scientific understanding. It is a long and diverse tradition that includes major figures such as William James, B.F. Skinner, and John Dewey. The particular branch that ProSocial draws upon is a mindfulness-based method called Acceptance and Commitment Therapy, or Training, or ACT, which is pronounced as a single word. The T in ACT can stand for either therapy or training. People who are highly distressed need therapy, but everyone can benefit from training, no matter what their current level of functioning. This is true for athletes all the way up to the elite level, and it is equally true for the rest of us. Just as any group can benefit from the core design principles, any group can benefit from ACT. And just as it was my great honor to work directly with Eleanor Ostrom, it is my great honor to work with the founder of ACT, Stephen C. Hayes, in the development of ProSocial. Not only did Steve help to found the method, but he also helped to found an entire society called the Association for Contextual Behavioral Science, with over 8,000 members worldwide, including both academic scientists and practitioners. ACBS members are a major source of ProSocial trainers because they've already mastered ACT and merely need to gain mastery of the core design principles. It is thanks largely to them that ProSocial is currently being implemented around the world. So far, I have described the two main conceptual elements of ProSocial, but how are they delivered to groups? The initial introduction is called the ProSocial Path, and it is done with the help of a trained facilitator. Group members can meet physically or online. In 3 relaxed sessions, group members learn how to become more adaptable with the help of ACT, learn and think about the core design principles in the context of their group, and formulate short-term goals so they can hit the ground running after the initial facilitation. State-of-the-art assessment methods track progress and contribute to a multi-group database for basic scientific research. And hit the ground running means running a marathon, a long-term working relationship with each group for continuous improvement and the development of ProSocial interactions with other groups. We aim to graduate from the micro scale, working with single groups, to the mesoscale, multi-group cultural ecosystems, and ultimately to the macro scale of serving the planetary good. One way to think about ProSocial is as a new inheritance system that aligns cultural evolution with our normative goals at a larger scale and faster pace than ever before. Another way to think about ProSocial is a final major transition to a planetary superorganism. But the best and more humble way to think about ProSocial is in the context of you and your group, helping it to become more effective and you to feel more fulfilled in the service of making the world a better place. I look forward to working with you, either directly or through the framework that I have worked with others to create.